Every morning after late October, a new kind of cold arrived. It wasn't just the air. Frost formed on the inside of the floorboards. The children woke up shivering, their breath visible in the dim cabin light. Sarah wrapped them in quilts. She sat them by the fire while she cooked cornmeal mush. But the cold never truly left their bones. The earth beneath the cabin pulled heat away faster than the fire could replace it. By mid-November, Daniel had a deep cough that wouldn't clear. Emma's fingers turned white at the tips when she carried wood. Sarah stopped sleeping through the night. Every 2 hours, she woke to feed the fire. She worried that if it died, her children might not wake again. Nobody noticed what was happening inside the small cabin near Bitterroot Creek. From the outside, it looked like every other homestead in the Montana Territory. Weathered pine logs, a stone chimney releasing thin smoke, a woodshed leaning against the north wall. Nothing about it suggested the quiet desperation inside. It was November of 1887. Winter came early to the mountains. The cold settled deep into the valley. Sarah Hutchkins was 32 years old, a widow with 2 young children. Emma was 8. Daniel was 5. Her husband, a timber cutter, had died the previous spring in a logging accident. He left her alone with a modest cabin, unpaid debts at the general store, and a winter she wasn't sure they would survive. The cabin itself was solid by local standards. 4.2 meters by 5.5 meters. Pine logs packed with chinking, a riverstone fireplace that drew well enough. The floor sat 15 centimeters above the ground on cedar posts. It was respectable, not comfortable, but livable, at least on paper. But the crawl space beneath that raised floor turned into a wind tunnel at night. The wind screamed beneath the cabin. It stole warmth right through the planks. Even with the fire glowing low, water in the wash basin froze solid before morning. Sarah tried everything the neighbors suggested. She packed straw under the floor. She hung canvas around the foundation. She burned more firewood than she could afford. Nothing worked. The cold came from below, steady and unforgiving. How could she protect her children from a cold that defied every known solution? The wind howled, rattling the cabin shutters. That night, Sarah made up her mind. She would dig, not a root cellar for food, not a storm shelter for safety. This would be something different, a small room beneath the cabin floor, a place where the earth itself could hold warmth. A pocket below the wind's reach, a place where the ground stayed steady, even when the air above turned deadly cold. She understood something many builders missed. 1.5 meters below the surface, the earth holds a constant temperature all year. In Montana, that meant about 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. Still cold, but far warmer than the winter nights above ground. With the cabin's own heat slowly sinking down, this underground space could grow even warmer, all without burning more wood. She didn't use fancy words for it. She called it staying below the wind. She told no one about her plan. Not because she needed secrets, but because she didn't want opinions. She didn't want to hear why it would fail, or why it was improper, or why a woman shouldn't dig beneath her own home. She only wanted her children warm. Before dawn the next morning, she pried up 3 floorboards. They were in the cabin's northwest corner, right under the children's bed. Below them lay hard-packed soil. She took a shovel and began to dig. Slowly, carefully. The first 20 centimeters were frozen and heavy. But then it softened. The earth was calmer there. Sarah wasn't guessing. She had thought this through. The room would be 2.4 meters long and 1.8 meters wide, just tall enough for her to sit upright. She would line the walls with riverstone. That would stop collapse and hold the warmth. A narrow ladder would lead down. A small ventilation pipe would angle up through the foundation. It would look like drainage. The digging itself took 3 long weeks. Sarah carried every shovelful of dirt out in a canvas sack, spreading it thin across her garden so no one would notice. Her hands blistered, then hardened. Her back ached with each load, but the hole grew deeper. By early December, the space was finally big enough for her to stand inside. She then started laying the stone. These were rounded river rocks she had gathered over the summer, each one carefully chosen. She stacked them with precision, wedging smaller stones into the gaps. This made the walls stable. The stone felt cold to the touch at first, but she knew it would hold warmth once the space heated up. She built a small platform inside, meant for bedding. She installed the narrow ventilation pipe, angling it up through the cabin's foundation so it looked like part of the drainage. For insulation, she packed pine needles and bark between the stone walls and the earth. Finally, she relaid the floorboards. Only a small trap door remained, hidden beneath a woven rug. From above, the cabin looked exactly the same. But below, it was quiet, still, and protected. When the temperature dropped near 0 degrees Celsius, Sarah tested her work. She climbed down with a candle and sat inside. The air was a bit musty, but it was warm enough that her breath didn't fog. It worked. She didn't tell the children yet. Winter had just begun, and the worst was still coming. Sarah needed more proof, not just a mild night or a short cold snap. She waited for winter to truly show its teeth. By mid-December, people in the settlement began to notice. They saw Sarah digging, but they didn't know what she was building, only that something strange was happening under her cabin. Old Mr. Calloway watched her hauling dirt one evening. He asked if she had a drainage problem. Sarah told him she was just improving the foundation. He nodded and walked on. 2 women from the church stopped by with preserved apples. They looked at the scattered soil near the garden. Was Sarah making a root cellar? Sarah said. Something like that. The women exchanged a look. It was late in the season for digging. The ground would freeze soon. At the general store, a clerk named Horace mentioned he'd heard about her digging. He warned her that foundations could shift, floors might sag. Sarah paid for her lamp oil and candles. She left without explaining. No one was cruel, but no one believed in what she was doing either. On December 18th, Sarah made the move. She carried the children's bedding down into the underground room. Emma hesitated at the opening. She said it was dark. Sarah told her it was warm. Daniel climbed down first. He touched the stone wall. He smiled. He said it was not cold. Sarah lit the oil lamp. She helped them settle onto the platform. The air was still, no wind, no rattling boards. If you find yourself questioning what's possible, subscribe. The real test of Sarah's hidden room was still to come, and it was a test no one expected. The storm hit on January 11th. At first, it was just a light snow. By afternoon, the wind turned it sideways, blowing hard across the valley. Night fell, and you couldn't see anything. By midnight, the temperature dropped below minus 18 degrees Celsius. The cold just kept coming. The next day, it was minus 28 degrees. The third day, minus 31 degrees. Wind ripped through the settlement. Snow piled 1.2 meters high against every cabin. Drifts climbed all the way to the roof lines. Firewood vanished under ice and snow. Wet, green wood wouldn't burn. Chimneys clogged, fires smoked, and then they died. People burned whatever they could find. Furniture, fence posts, anything that would catch a flame. Sarah's own wood pile shrank fast. Even with careful rationing, the cabin couldn't hold heat. Ice formed on the inside of the windows. Frost crept across the walls. The water bucket froze solid within an hour. On the 8th night, with the storm still raging, the temperature inside the cabin dropped to 3 degrees Celsius. The fire was still going, but it wasn't enough. Sarah made her choice. She banked the fire low, just enough to keep the chimney warm. She wrapped Emma and Daniel in every blanket she owned. Then, she led them down the ladder. Emma carried the oil lamp. Daniel clutched Sarah's skirt. When the trapdoor closed, the wind vanished. The underground room was quiet. The stone walls were dry. The air was still. Sarah checked the small thermometer she had hung there. It read 12 degrees Celsius. Outside it was minus 32 degrees with the wind still howling. They stayed below. For 4 days the storm raged outside. Sarah climbed up twice a day just to tend the fire. Each time, the cold snatched her breath away. She would return underground shaking, then warm again within minutes. They ate dried apples and cold cornbread. They told stories. They slept. The children didn't cough. They didn't shiver. Daniel slept through the nights. Emma read by lamplight, her fingers never numb. The storm finally broke. The settlement began to dig out, clearing paths, checking on neighbors. That was when people started to notice. Margaret Briggs came first to Sarah's cabin, carrying a jar of broth. She expected to find Sarah broken, desperate. Instead, she found Sarah calm. Her children played quietly inside. The cabin felt warmer than her own home. Margaret asked Sarah how much wood she had burned during the blizzard. Sarah said, "Less than expected." Margaret's husband had frostbitten fingers. Her youngest child could barely walk from swollen feet. Sarah's children looked healthy. 2 days later, Jacob Stern stopped by. He was the carpenter who had laughed at Sarah's digging. He stared at the thin smoke rising from her chimney. He asked her how she made it through the storm. Sarah told him they stayed below the wind. Understanding spread slowly at first. Then, all at once, Horace, the store clerk, came back with questions. "How deep?" he asked. "What stone did you use? How did the air move?" Sarah showed him everything. She explained it simply. Earth held heat, stone stored it. The wind never touched them down there. Within a week, other families began digging. The numbers could not be ignored. While others burned 2 or 3 cords of wood and still nearly froze, Sarah used less than half a cord. By late January, the pastor spoke of it in church. He called it a lesson, not a miracle. He said sometimes the simplest answers are the ones people overlook. Jacob apologized to Sarah in public. He said he was wrong. She just nodded. She said it worked for them. By spring, the secret bedroom was no longer a secret. The settlement would never think about shelter the same way again. By February, the idea had taken hold. 3 families living near Bitterroot Creek started digging under their own cabins. They didn't do it because Sarah told them to. They saw the results with their own eyes. They saw her children healthy, not coughing through the night. They saw her woodpile last, while their own vanished. They knew the quiet shame of burning furniture just to survive. Jacob Stern, the carpenter who had laughed at Sarah's digging, was the first to finish his underground room. He followed her design almost exactly. Riverstone walls stacked without mortar, packed tight with bark and pine needles. A narrow ladder. A hidden trapdoor beneath a rug. When his family spent their first night in that space, his wife cried with relief. The room stayed warm without a roaring fire. The silence felt like safety. Margaret Briggs couldn't dig under her cabin. The foundation was too shallow. Instead, she built a partially buried room against her north wall. It sank 3 feet into the earth. It had stone sides and a sawed timber roof. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Her children stopped waking with numb hands. The change spread quietly. No big meetings, no announcements. Just the sound of shovels hitting dirt. By the next winter, 7 families had some version of Sarah's idea. Some dug full rooms. Others built small sleeping spaces. A few combined them with root cellars, using the same space for both food and shelter. Each design shifted a little, depending on the soil, the stone, or the water they found. But the core idea stayed the same. Let the earth do the work. The difference showed quickly. Firewood lasted longer. Chimneys cracked less often. Fewer children got sick from smoke-filled cabins. People stopped pushing their stoves past safety just to chase warmth. The settlement noticed something else, too. They were calmer in winter, less desperate. Storms still came. Snow still buried the valley. But fear no longer ruled every cold night. Sarah never took credit. She answered questions when people asked. She showed them her room. She explained it simply. 5 feet down, the earth does not change. Stone holds heat. Wind steals it. Stay below the wind, that was all. In the spring of 1889, a man from another settlement passed through. He noticed a trap door. He asked about it, Sarah explained. The man listened closely. He said his family struggled every winter. He asked if her idea could work where he lived. Sarah told him the ground was the same everywhere, only the digging was different. The small cabin near Bitterroot Creek once held a quiet secret. Now the earth's warmth had spread, changing whole communities. By the early 1890s, similar underground sleeping spaces started appearing across Wyoming and the Dakotas. Some were dug deep, others were half buried. Some used stone, others used timber. The exact shape changed, but the core principle remained the same. Agricultural agents even started telling farmers to use partial earth sheltering for barns and workshops. Not because it was a new idea, but because it simply worked. Sarah's children grew up thinking it was normal to sleep below ground in winter. Her daughter, Emma, later built a similar space under her own homestead in Idaho. Her son Daniel became a stonemason. He used earth-sheltered designs in public buildings around Missoula. He never called it an invention. To him, it was just good sense. Sarah remarried in 1894. Her new husband slept in the underground room without a single complaint. He said it was warmer than the house he grew up in. The room stayed. It was no longer a secret, just part of the cabin. Looking back, nothing Sarah did was truly revolutionary. People had lived underground for thousands of years. Pit houses, dugouts, earth-covered homes existed all over the world. What Sarah did was remember something frontier. Life had started to forget. The ground is not an enemy, it is shelter. When everyone else built higher walls and burned more wood, she looked down. She trusted the earth beneath her feet. The result was not comfort. It was survival. A steady 55 degrees during the worst storm in 40 years. Half the firewood burned. Children lived through winter without fear. Sarah Hutchins never set out to change how people built. She only wanted her children warm. But one quiet decision made on a frozen night shifted how an entire settlement understood shelter. Sometimes the smartest answers are not new. Sometimes they have been waiting beneath your feet the whole time. If this kind of forgotten wisdom is something you find interesting, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what old technique do you think we've forgotten that still has a use nobody's seen yet?